I'm just going to give a quick introduction, and that's about as formal as it gets. My name is Sarah Milligan. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program with Oklahoma State University Library. Today's date is September 23rd, 2023. Whoa, 23rd in 2023. I'm interviewing Dr. Ted Schupbach today as a part of the Doel Reed Center History Project. And we're going to talk a little bit about his relationship with Martha Reed and just being a long-standing figure in Taos, New Mexico, where the Doel Reed Center resides. All right, that's it. So it would be helpful to start with just a little bit of background. So tell me a little bit about yourself, like where are you from and sort of like how you came to your relationship with OSU. Let's just start there.
I grew up in Tulsa, and my father was a science teacher, and he got a master's degree from Oklahoma State in 1960. And I went to second grade here when I was I went to Eugene Field Elementary School.
Did you?
And when I was in second grade, and which ties in with Martha Reed because she went to Eugene Field Elementary School.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, like I said, I grew up in Tulsa, went to Nathan Hale High School. I actually lived in the Union District, but my dad was a science teacher and thought that Nathan Hale had the best science department, so I transferred into Nathan Hale. And that time, a lot of the engineers from North American Rockwell and McDonnell Douglas and American Airlines they'd all kind of concentrated in the Nathan Hale district. So as a result, Tulsa Public Schools kind of put their best teachers there in science. Mm-hmm. So then I went to Oklahoma State University and was in the Department of Arts and Sciences. Then I got a bachelor's degree from College of Arts and Sciences, and then I got my UVM from Oklahoma State. Then after that, I spent a year in Los Alamos. I came back and spent a few months in Tulsa, and then bought my veterinary practice in Taos, New Mexico in 1979. So I moved to Taos in 1979, and as a practicing veterinarian, I'm still practicing there. Yeah. And so that's sort of my history.
You got your bachelor's degree from the College of Arts and Science. What was your degree in?
It was in pre-medical science.
It was in pre-med. Okay, that makes sense. At what point did you know you wanted to be a vet?
Well, when I was in high school, I originally wanted to be an architect, but between my sophomore and junior year in high school, I started working at a veterinary clinic. Mm-hmm. And worked at the Altaview Veterinary Clinic with Dr. Myers there for, I'd worked all through summers and during the school year, and then I worked for him a few summers after, I graduated from college. I worked in the summer. Yeah. So, but when I was working in high school, there, then by the time I graduated from high school, I decided to go become a veterinarian.
Oh, that's a good way to figure out if you actually know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you moved from Tulsa to Taos. You said you bought a business in Taos. How did you find out about it? Like, that's not a direct correlation.
Well, when I was in, there was a guy that was a year ahead of me in veterinary school, Charles Kelsey. Mm-hmm. He was from Lawton, and his dad and uncle had a practice in Lawton. And when he graduated from vet school, he worked with his dad and uncle, but it's just too close to family or something. He decided he wanted to do something different. So he actually bought this practice in Taos in 1977. And when I took the state boards in New Mexico, he was taking the state boards. And so we talked about what he was doing and what I was doing. And he was moving to Taos and I was moving to Los Alamos, so it's, like an hour and 20 minutes or something from in between. And so when I got my first job in Los Alamos as a veterinarian, and so Los Alamos, it's a pretty town, but there wasn't much to do there at all. So we often about once a month we'd come up to Taos, and then we'd visit with the Kelseys. And I came up to Taos, and then when I was working in Tulsa, but I wasn't real happy with my situation that I was working in the clinic at Ranch Acres Veterinary Clinic there, my second job out of school there. And so we moved back to Tulsa because we were having a baby. Our parents all lived in Tulsa, so we moved back to Tulsa for a little while, and for a year. But my sister was getting married in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and looked at the map, and there was a practice that was interviewing in Farmington for a job. So we decided to kind of take a little detour and go to Taos, and then stay there, and then I jaunted over to Farmington to interview for this job, and then came back. But anyway, we found out that practice was for sale. They didn't. Taos is a small town, and it's much smaller than even Lawton, quite a bit smaller than Lawton. So there weren't shopping centers and things like that. So anyway, they decided to move, but Dr. Kelsey joined the Army and later became head of the Army Veterinary Corps. So that was, he moved up the ladder there, but I bought his practice then in 1977. And, we were there on Memorial Day weekend, found out about it, and I bought the practice August 15th.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, sounds like it was a good timing on everyone's part.
Well, anyway, I'm still there. I would imagine Dr. Kelsey's retired now, but he was. I saw him about 3 years ago, and I think he was still in the Army.
Interesting. Okay, so then you moved to Taos. At what point did you actually interact or know anything about the Reeds? Because I know that you later in your chronology, had a relationship with Martha Reed as far as like help caring for her pets and her animals, and but her parents were still alive in the 70s. I don't know if you had any interaction or knowledge about them.
I really didn't know the parents.
Yeah.
I never met them, but I had a client that had studied art under Doel Reed, and she had mentioned that, but she was an artist there in Taos, and but I didn't know the parents. I met Martha in I think it was about 1980, and so that story was when she called me. It was like a Sunday night. It was after 10 o'clock, and I think it was probably about 10:30 when she called, and I asked her where she lived. My clinic is on the north end of town, and Taos south of Taos, and she and her parents lived at the time, and she had some sort of emergency with her cat. I think it was just like an abscess, but she thought it was an emergency. And so I said, well, where do you live? And she said, I was just trying to get an idea of how long it would take her to get to the clinic. So I asked her where she lived. She said Talpa. And I said, okay. At that time, there weren't many traffic lights in town. So I said, okay, it takes about 15, 20 minutes to get here. that time of night there'd be no traffic. And she goes, "Oh my heavens, I can't possibly get there that soon." And I said, "Well, how long will it take you?" And she goes, "Well, at least an hour." Well, it took her at least an hour to get there to the clinic. And when she came, she was just had all her makeup on and was dressed to the nines. She had her broomstick skirt on, and a fancy blouse, and all this jewelry, but just tons of makeup. And anyway, it was just kind of funny at the time. She didn't get there till after 11:30, I think, but it's because she had to put her makeup on and get dressed.
We called you for emergency services way after hours, but yeah.
So anyway, that's how I first met Martha, and so I took care of her cats ever since then.
Yeah.
Until she died.
Well, tell me a little bit about that, because I think Martha's love of animals is definitely part of the thing that most people that knew her remember. So I don't know exactly what I'm asking, other than she had a lot of pets, I think, but I don't really know how she came. Did she just take in strays off the street, or was she just
Well, she would feed cats, and then first just out her back door, and then eventually they'd come in. When I first met her, she just had the one cat, and then when there was first talk of her might be giving the property to Oklahoma State, she wasn't working anymore. She'd closed the dress shop, I think, by then, and she wasn't really working, so money was getting a little tight for her. So, but she talked to me about donating, that she was wanting to donate the property to Oklahoma State when she passed away. So anyway, she after she had told me that, she didn't have some money one time, but she wanted to give me a Doel Reed print or painting for payment. And I said, "No, just hang on to those." And I said, "Look, if you just keep that art and give it to Oklahoma State, then I'll treat your pets." And I'll treat. At that time, she only had one cat named Nancy Reagan, and she loved Nancy Reagan. And so that was her cat's name. And that was when we were talking about the Doel Reed Center. And so anyway, as soon as I told her that she, I'd take care of her pets, and all of a sudden she started acquiring more and more animals. So she would get 4, 5, 6 cats, pretty much for the entire time that she lived in from then on out, and even got a dog. And so anyway, so I was taking care of her pets then, trying to keep the art in the collection.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I was probably the first donor to the Doel Reed Center.
You were absolutely.
Anyway, but
so that would have been in the mid 2000s. So between 1980 and mid 2000s, where that sort of conversation was taking place, did you see her regularly as just a part of your practice, or did you know who she was around town? Or
well, I knew that her dress shop, was pretty famous. That was pretty famous, and when we first met, for some reason, it in that conversation, it came up. I think she might have asked where I went to vet school, and then I said Oklahoma State, and then she did tell me about her dad, being a professor there, and then I said, "Yeah, I went there. I went to school there when I was in 2nd grade. Went to Eugene Field." She goes, "Oh, I went to Eugene Field Elementary." So, she she really liked that connection there. But so every now and then a few times I'd go over there. She invited me over. One time she was having what she called a soiree, where she has we'd have people over and we'd drink some wine and sherry,
Mm-hmm.
and she'd have a little hors d'oeuvre played out, and anyway, so and every time I went to a couple of soirees anyway, and she'd always bring up that we went to the same elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So the funny thing about that is at her memorial service, I did get up and speak and told the story about Martha and coming in and dressing the first time we met. Had to dress up and put all her makeup on late at night just to come into the veterinarian on an emergency. So I told that story at her memorial service, and after the memorial service, a guy came up to me. He goes, "You're much younger than I expected." And I said, "Well, why?" She says, "Well, Martha said you went to elementary school together."
That's funny.
Anyway, so
A few years apart.
yeah. Anyway, that was kind of a funny story there when it became,
It's funny.
she told people, by the end of her, toward the end of her life there, things ran together, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he misheard, but whatever. It was just kind of funny.
That's funny. So yeah, her shop was well known, and did she how was her relationship with people in Taos? I mean, like you said, it's sort of a small town.
Yeah, but I think she was well liked. She had. I've talked to some of the people that have been there a long time, like Barbara Brenner, who's Oscar Burninghaus's daughter, who's one of the Taos founders. Oscar Burninghaus was one of the Taos founder artists. Anyway, when I've asked, everybody knew her, but she didn't like socialize a lot with, she would go to a lot of functions, but she didn't, I don't think she, had a huge bunch of friends, because she worked a lot and stuff. But she, there's pictures of her going to a lot of things, she's present in a lot of pictures. And when you ask the people that are in those pictures with her, they said, "Oh, I knew Martha. She's, we got along fine," but they didn't really, they'd see her at events, but not, they didn't like hang out with her, on a regular basis as far as but I know she had certain groups of friends, and I think she got a lot of the people from Talpa, but she often at her soirees would have a disproportionate amount of men there. And so that's the one thing I noted there about Martha. So a lot of the pictures, the men are dead. When I've recognized and asked people, when I've seen these pictures and stuff where she's there, the men are not present. A lot of them have passed away. And so, anyway.
Well, so one of the things also that you hear a lot about Martha, and tied to her business, but also I think tied to her personality probably, is there was a lot of celebrities in and out, it seemed like, of her sphere over time related to either her sort of rise to fashionista fame for a period of time or whatever. And so I'm curious, about that side of things too, is, what do you know about her experience? Was Nancy Reagan her cat because she sold Nancy Reagan a dress, or what are some of those stories?
I never, I just, She just said that she really admired Nancy Reagan.
Okay.
You know, and that's kind of,
That's okay.
you know, I don't remember hearing that she actually met Nancy Reagan. You know, she may have.
Who knows? But
Yeah,
it's
she may have,
She
yeah.
just kind of has this legendary.
Yeah.
You know, just sort of when you read newspaper articles from sort of her real period of that style really taking hold. You know, you see celebrities in Taos for reasons or
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to
Well,
shop
a
or
lot of,
whatever.
you know, there've been a lot of celebrities, you know, in my lifetime come through Taos. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk maybe then she told you she was thinking about this relationship with OSU to donate the homestead property her that her parents had, gosh, I think they moved there in the 60s if I'm remembering that
I think
correctly.
1959.
59.
Yeah.
And so they had been there for a long time, and then you know, the property was obviously much older than that as well. So at what point did you become more knowledgeable of the people that were sort of helping to make that conversation move forward? Because obviously there's a lot of people that from OSU and the
Yeah.
other people just in her life that were kind of helping that conversation.
Well, it was probably around 2005.
Mhm.
I met Bill and Kat Thompson, and so that's we started talking about. You know, I met them just at a dinner somewhere, and then, you know, the OSU connection. So, you know, we started talking about OSU, and then we started talking about Martha, you know, and I think there was, you know, it was kind of in the air then, you know, but that was, they were on the original advisory committee, but they knew her personally, and so they worked then. They lived in both Stillwater and I had a place in Taos, and so they, you know, they were encouraging her in the project, and, you know, to keep the problem. A lot of the problem is, you know, as Martha got more, as she got older, she got more dependent on needing people around, and I think a lot of the people that ended up helping her, some of them were, they all thought that they would prefer that she give them some of the money instead of giving it to OSU. So, you know, it was unfortunate that because, I mean, they would say things to Martha that, you know, so it gave Martha second thoughts where this was not, you know, and so, but I know Bill and Kat, you know, would visit her, you know, once or twice a week just to kind of keep her encouraged to give the property to Oklahoma State. And so anyway, the people that, some of those people that hung out with her then didn't have, you know, necessarily the best motives in mind. They were just trying to get part of the estate.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I really, you know, credit, you know, several, Kent Young, of course, and Bill and Kat were really influential there. And then, you know, when I would see her, you know, and by then I was mainly, when her cats needed treatment, I would go to her house.
Mm.
So, you know, so then I would always, you know, encourage her to keep OSU in mind.
Yeah.
And
Well, it sounds like she's the one that broached it with you in the first place. So sort of that was on her mind at some point. So you'd been in a conversation with her for a long time, it sounds like. over multiple.
Yeah, I can't say
years or so.
definitively when, but
Right.
but yeah, it was,
Yeah.
because it, most often we would talk about Oklahoma State,
I see.
her time, and when she was um, growing up in college.
Did she seem to have good feelings towards Stillwater and OSU?
Oh yeah, she did. No, it was always. She never. There was one time, at the very end there, when she was saying something about. She said something about OSU taking advantage of her, and I said, Martha, it's like, rarely would any donor start giving you money before the donation. I said, that's really unusual. And I said, you're actually lucky that they're helping you that way. And that was coming from what the other people there were feeding her.
Mm-hmm.
But, Oklahoma State was extremely generous. And once and I think Martha was actually hospitalized and then was in the living center for several weeks. About early on in this time when that contract was first drawn up and stuff. So at that time it really didn't look like she wasn't going to live very long, and I think that's probably part of why that contract was written that way. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know, was it 5 years or something that she lived? Huh?
Yeah, it was a few. It was 3 or 5. I can't remember.
But it was that she actually got support from Oklahoma State, and but I think it was, when her health was so bad, she was real close to death earlier, in that period, and then, like I said, was in the living center for several weeks. Mm-hmm. And a little, kind of almost hospice, and then she rallied and came home. And but like I said, after that time, that's the time that I mainly went over to her place, just to see the animals.
Yeah. Well, so when she did die and the property was transferred to OSU, I know there was a lot of, it seems like, there were already classes of students coming out to Taos before she died, and, got to meet with her and kind of spent some time at the house and did projects. So some of the educational goals for what the center was being set up to do, seems like, from what I understand, were already sort of starting to happen before she passed. So I'm kind of wondering what you remember from that period, at the end of her life, where it actually, the center was sort of building into a thing, even without the physical space of the Reed complex. And then after she passed, sort of like what you remember of the physical property, transitioning into what it is.
Well, of course, when she died, I didn't, I'd go by there and look at, things, but I remember, in the construction part, that they had to just tear out a whole side of the adobe wall almost and reconstruct it on that south-facing part of Martha's house. I think Martha's house was in the worst shape of all the homes, as far as the adobe structure part of it, and I think part of it is probably that happened with the adobe. You have the adobe and then it's stuccoed over, mm-hmm. And if that stucco isn't well maintained and certain things happen, and then just so in recent times here, I became head of the building committee, so I started getting up on the roofs, and there's part of it is how the parapets are and stuff. There's uh, it was where the stucco some of the parapets don't go very high, and so we get a lot of snow in the winter, more than here, and so snow would build up there, and it would get from the roof, even get and lap over into that and then drip into that adobe and eroded that adobe. So now that we're kind of aware of the problem, we can be a little more proactive in preventing some of those problems.
Yeah.
But I don't think Martha did any maintenance on the property. That's one thing that wasn't her forte. So, I mean, she just, she loved the place, but she didn't spend any money on repairs. And adobe needs work from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, OSU got a little bit of a surprise on the construction there. And then at the time, I wasn't on the first advisory board and didn't have really any input on what was going on. But, they got a very good contractor, but he was also noted for being the most expensive. And so on the initial construction,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember stopping in a couple of times, and talking to Wayne Rutherford, and he kind of showed me, he goes, this is why it's taken so long. It's really a nightmare, kind of some of the stuff that happened, on that wall.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think by being aware of what we need to do,
Mm-hmm.
we can better maintain that property. But Martha, I don't think did anything at all. And I know sometimes in the wintertime she'd just leave her back door open to let the animals come and go, because she, instead of installing the doggy door, she just left the door open.
That sounds cold.
Yeah. So she liked her place there.
Yeah. Well, I think several people have commented on, for example, the roof. That it was obvious from going in that there was going to be needed repair on supporting the roof differently or doing some work like that. So I'm assuming too, if you were making house calls, you had an eye for some of that probably.
Yeah.
Do you live in an adobe structure? I have no idea.
Well, my house is not adobe. The original part of my house was actually made with railroad ties that were part of the Chili line. It was a narrow gauge railroad, and when the Chili line was a spur that came off the Santa Fe Railroad from Santa Fe, and went all the way from Santa Fe up to the southern Colorado. In the late 1800s, chili became very popular spice in the northeast of the United States, New York and Philadelphia and Boston. The green chili from New Mexico and Colorado became very popular. So the farmers in southern Colorado started growing lots of chilies. And so in the late 1800s, that continued up until World War I. And so they built this narrow gauge railroad that went from Santa Fe, and it went up through the Rio Grande Gorge a little bit, and the first part, and then headed over to Tres Padres, and then on up to Antonito. And then there were spurs. You can still see a lot of the narrow gauge tracks up in Colorado, southern Colorado, that went around to the different parts of southern Colorado. Anyway, when World War I broke out, all the farmers joined the army and went to war, and they stopped growing chilies. And when they stopped growing them, then they quit eating them in metropolitan areas and so much, and they went back to basic food, and so they when they came back, they started growing other crops up there in southern Colorado, and so the chili line essentially quit running then, and then it just, the tracks were there, narrow gauge tracks there. But at the end of World War II, they needed, there was a big shortage of steel. And so they took up the rails and sold the rails off for steel, scrap steel, because they were valuable. But they said anybody that wants those railroad ties are welcome to them, because they actually made it to where it couldn't be a road then, because the bump, so a bunch of people from the Taos area went down there and got it and built. They'd stack them up and use these big spikes and stack them together, and then they stucco over them, so it looks like adobe, and it was as thick as the adobes. So it's very similar. So my original house, it has a few additions now, but the original house was the railroad tie.
Interesting.
And but those railroad ties were, a lot of them were hand hewn from from like 1880. So, and every now and then we have these spikes that were all handmade railroad spikes, that just somebody had made on a forge, like a blacksmith. Instead of like mass produced, they were, but there's still some of those railroad spikes in my house, because one time there was a window, but we decided to make a doorway to a room that had been added on. It used to be just for the outside, but so we decided to make it into a doorway. So when the contractor said, they took a chainsaw and they hit one of those the spikes, sparks went everywhere. Anyway, so that was in the 1948 to 1950. A lot of the structures built in Taos at that period were railroad tie houses.
I remember that. How interesting.
With stucco on the outside.
Yeah. So you know a little bit about maintaining historic houses if you live in them.
That, the stucco part there, but then, just living in Taos, I've learned a lot about adobe and just, what they need. Like the Ranchos de Taos Church, they keep it traditional, and they've done the original mud plaster on the outside, and they come in every year, they redo it, because you've got to protect the inner walls there of the road.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so at what point did you become more engaged with the Doel Reed Center? Because I know now, like you said, you're on the advisory board for it, and taking care of the what is you just said the name of the committee. I already forgot. It's like
it was just, we call
building
it
maintenance.
Building,
Yeah. Okay. Committee, which obviously is a group of people who make sure the building's still.
Well, we kind of didn't do much for a long time, but then when I became chairman of that committee, I actually hired a building inspector to come out to just walk through all the buildings with me and what needs to be done. And anyway, so the roofs were the main issue, and he pointed out a lot of areas where it could, if you don't fix this, it's going to leak and stuff. So that's the first thing we dealt with. So we're doing little things at a time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the windows are so old that the function is deteriorating, and there's some windows that are just about to fall apart. Some old wood windows that were in the back part of the studio. um, that are just, they're just, the wood is just almost gone. So we're looking at maybe possibly replacing those windows with more modern ones, but look similar to on the outside. The pane pattern will be similar, but then we can end up with a more energy efficient window. But again, like that, some of those, like that one window I know in the back of the studio is just about to just cave in. And so we were hoping to try to keep things as historic as possible, but at some point, it's we're thinking, it might be best just to go something that looks like it, but not. But I think if Doel Reed were living there, I think he would, if things got non-functional, he would replace it.
Yeah.
So, I think, unless you build a bubble around him, it's going to be hard to preserve everything just as is.
Yeah.
And so, we have to make those final decisions at some point. But there's some of these metal windows that were hand cranks that don't close very well, and so we're faced with all kinds of. It's an ongoing project to keep the thing going.
Yeah. So
it's important that we keep people excited about the center, so we keep getting money to maintain it, because it's out of the state. It has to be all private donations to keep it going. So
yeah.
But if we can keep a good group going, I think because people like Ken Young and myself aren't going to be around forever, and people that worked so hard. I mean, all the people on the committee, I think, worked really hard.
Yeah.
We don't have any slackers. So, everybody does something a little differently. But, we have different strengths, so we've got enough people that we keep our bases pretty well covered, I think. Yeah. And so that's our biggest challenge right now, is how do you maintain it and keep the historical value. And but I think the concept would be good.
So who recruited you to be on the advisory board? When did that happen?
Well, let's see. I can't remember exactly when it happened, but it was. I can't remember exactly when I got on the advisory committee, but but I think I've been active with really almost from the start. I started having a party at my house when they'd have their kind of annual meeting here, and the people would come over. So I was actually having that party before I was on the board, and I maintained that. So we always have a good time.
Hosting the OSU delegation of Doel Reed efforts.
Yeah. So so you're always welcome to come.
Well, thank you.
It's usually it's usually the last week. Like either parties usually either Thursday or Friday the week before. I mean the day before, or either the day of our annual meeting or the night before. That's usually the Friday, the last Friday of the month.
Yeah. So you've been doing that for 13 some odd years at this point.
Almost from the start, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you've talked around this, but I want to ask more directly. Why do you stay involved with the Doel Reed Center? Why do you think it's important?
Well, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. Of course, having gone to Oklahoma State and then living in Taos, I think, it can provide the students of OSU. I think that's one of the main things, is providing the students with at OSU, sort of a window to a world that they might not otherwise know about, and expand horizons and help with different disciplines. I think Martha wanted to help the university, and especially students. So I think we can do that. And some of these kids, Taos is almost like an old different world. It's like a different country, and so some of these kids that can't maybe afford a trip abroad might be able to come to Taos with a scholarship that we give. So it's and I think it's helpful for the town to have brings money into Taos. When we have these different things, it brings money into our community. So I'm helping both my community and my alma mater. So, yeah.
What do you see when you think about what you hope the future of the center is going to look like? What are some of the things that you think are important?
Well, of course, if we're going to have it, we need to maintain the buildings. And if we, the thing is in the long run, certain types of maintenance can prevent a lot of things, bigger expenses in the long run, so, we don't have to redo the walls like we did the original time, so, some of these adobes, if you keep the stucco intact and keep the roofs working, they're adobe structures in Taos that go back to literally to the 1400s that were built on indigenous buildings, but there are some that are standing that are clearly go back to the late 1500s. But when the Spanish first came here, they in the Talpa area, not far from the center, there's actually longer than that. The indigenous Pueblo people, occupied that area, and their structures there were their log cabin like structure. I had a friend that lived over there, real near where the center is, and he had an adobe house, but they were doing some sort of electrical work or something and dug into this wall, and it was like a log cabin. There was logs stacked up, and they carbon dated those logs to the 1200s. And so that was originally like an indigenous structure that was utilized. So that area, see, where Talpa is, where this is, it's just not far from where this Pueblo up in Pot Creek was. And and there's, they're different historical, there was no written history, so we don't know for sure, but it looks like the original Pueblo was at Pot Creek, and then there was some sort of disagreement or something, and some moved up to Picaris and some moved down over to Taos. But even in Taos, there's places where it goes back, they can, carbon date some of the vigas and stuff that were in these places that carbon date, back to the, late single digit, into the, 800s, 900s. When, the Pueblo people came from Chaco Canyon, really there was some sort of disturbance there, through the Doel Reed Center. I took an astroarchaeological course, but there was like this exploding nebulae that lit up the nighttime sky, and shortly after that, then there seemed to be a little bit of a scatter of the people, and probably the priests and stuff that could predict all that they had all these solar, these astrological knowledge, but there's no way to predict that. And so that could have just kind of shaken people's faith in their leaders that had this mystical control over them. But some of those people moved over to this area. So that was that's what they suspect is the origin. It came from, they can tell, like, actually on my property, there's an old pit house where they dug down. That's probably from around the year 1000 or so. But a lot of the pottery is from Chaco Canyon.
Interesting.
And so
did you have some archaeological work done in your property then?
I haven't had anybody do it. It's kind of a funny thing. Not funny, but it's a sad thing in a way. The guy that owned the property at one time had a TV repair shop, and there was this big hole in the ground because the roof had collapsed on this pit house. So he used that hole to dump cans and TV tubes, so it's full of all these tubes from these old TVs and transformers from all these TV parts that were from the TVs from the 50s, 60s, and 70s in there, and plus all these cans and bottles and stuff. So my son and I spent a whole day one time cleaning, trash bag after trash bag and cans, because the glass we couldn't put in the bag so much. We worked all day one day, and it didn't even look like we put a dent in that. So sometime, I was hoping that, the thing is, there's so many sites like that in the Taos area that no group, I brought it up to SMU years before, we had the Doel Reed Center here. I brought it up to SMU. It has a facility at Pot Creek, and they actually own that. The SMU Taos has a big, but they have control over that Pueblo site, and they weren't interested, because they're just
so many.
They're sort of a dime a dozen here.
Yeah. But
I have just tons of these pottery shards in my yard, and they were quite active there on my property.
Okay.
But there was there's this ridge that goes all the way to Arroyo Seco that they populated, and I had a client that they were digging in his yard in a backhoe, and they found a whole skeleton. And so they called the state police. The state police took the skeleton to Albuquerque, and it was carbon dated to be 1,000 years old.
Oh, gosh.
And then they since then found several other skeletons. And
so they did an archaeological assessment.
And so they're doing things there, but the Pueblo's not interested in, the Taos Pueblo isn't interested in dealing with it. I mean, they're all over the place. So and so different, but this, she's a forensic anthropologist, got involved with some of this stuff. And so they did bring me this one bunch of bones and had me x-ray it. And it's to go through the human hospital to x-ray these bones is like, the paperwork's so long that they didn't want to deal with it. And so they asked me if I would x-ray this skeleton. And we x-rayed it, and the reason this particular skeleton they x-rayed it, this forensic anthropologist was trying to figure out, if it had multiple myeloma. And sure enough, it had the male population in Taos has a multiple myeloma rate that's like 30 times the national average.
Really?
And this skeleton that was 1,000 years old, we x-rayed it, and both the spine and the and the head had myeloma type lesions,
Huh.
and so the we have radon there in the soil in some places. Some is higher than others, and so in their pueblos, they the male population is 30 times the national average. The female population is slightly below the national average in multiple myeloma. So the only difference is the males go down these kivas and spend months at a time in these kivas as a part of their spiritual life and just their customs. And so there's radon in the soil, but both the vigas that they use and the firewood that they burn is high in radon. So, but the same practice happened back 1,000 years ago. That they were getting multiple myeloma 1,000 years ago.
Oh, interesting.
From that radon.
Yeah. Were they repatriating? Did they find someone to repatriate those bones to?
The Pueblo wasn't interested, so I think they're just, I don't know exactly where, some of those bones I think are, that's part of the reason I was x-raying them, so then they could just go back to the site.
Yeah, I see.
And and after that experience where they said, nobody was really interested, now in the last year I've had human bones come up on my property, and I just rebury them where I find them.
Yeah.
Just where they come up, then I put them, just dig a little deeper, and what I'm having, I've got trees. I think the roots are pushing them up.
I see. Yeah.
I've had two different places come up in the last year.
Well, of course, you would know what that looks like. So.
Yeah. So
what a different place to live.
Yeah. So.
What about the Pueblo and relationships with Taos now, or even, I know, kind of bring that full circle. I know Martha had a relationship to some degree in her business.
Yeah, she employed the Pueblo women to work and got a lot. And Doel Reed had developed a relationship with Pueblo, and he would, he knew, he got along real well with the elders at the Pueblo, and so they that was noted that he was, that's we know that he was involved with, he was conscious of their beliefs and really work. He was had a good working relationship with Pueblo, and so did Martha.
I see.
Yeah.
That was part of my curiosity, is I knew that she had employed a number of women from the Pueblo nearby. I was in that missing part for me was like, well, how did she, how did she start that relationship? So,
well, I think a lot of that was just she needed people to work for her, especially in the heyday of her, so she did the designing basically, and then they did the sewing and the sewing and hand. A lot of things were hand stitched. The waistbands and stuff. There are certain things that were hand stitched.
Yeah.
And so, the fabrics had to be cut out, and so there's a lady that worked for her many years in the dress shop, Lucy Archuleta. And I know we've been trying to get.
Kent's mentioned her, yeah.
Yeah. So she worked with her for, a couple 3 decades in the dress shop, and then when Martha, then she started helping Martha clean her house, and then she was there toward the end there, with doing working at the house, and And when she died, then I actually hired her to do my housekeeping for a little bit, and but then she kind of just quit showing up. So I didn't fire her; she just kind of quit showing up. But the but she talked about working in the shop, and she kind of said that she ran the shop. So
Yeah.
she said I ran the shop for Martha.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, so I think if we can still get anything from Lucy, it'd be nice. But she's, and when Martha died, Lucy wasn't. You could tell she'd lost some of her. She's not quite as sharp as she used to be.
Oh yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much you can get right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I understand.
It'd be. I know Kent's real interested in getting more stuff, but well, first of all, the Pueblo people, a lot of times they really aren't. They don't like pictures being taken of them, and so I think it would have to be just an oral interview if you could.
Which I'd assumed that. Well, and this is, I mean, that's a longer conversation. That if it's something that she specifically wants to participate in some capacity, just to sort of have that space recorded.
Yeah,
obviously, it's
yeah.
whatever
It'd
she
be
would be
nice, yeah.
comfortable with. But if not, I mean,
Yeah.
that's understandable too. That's just a different piece.
But I'm thinking, Kent used to be, able to get a hold of her, and he can't anymore. He hasn't been able to. So, she may just be electing, or she may just not remember stuff now.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, when she worked for me, you could tell she'd slipped a little bit mentally.
Yeah.
And wasn't as sharp as, because just I would see her sometimes with Martha and her cats.
Oh yeah, she'd be there when you'd come over.
Yeah, or she'd bring it. Sometimes she'd come in with them.
I see. Well, that's all an interesting sort of helping to contextualize Martha and sort of like who she was and how, as she occupied that space, and then what that legacy of the physical space continues on as it is this.
But I think
space.
I think Martha would be happy about things, and I know Lucy. I remember one thing she said that Martha wouldn't have been happy with some of the renovation that we did. I think it was more of Martha's house itself.
Mm-hmm.
The interior we changed a little bit of the feel of that, but it was from more of the old, we made it modernized kind of inside,
I see.
The spiffed it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the outside, it's the same. I have actually a painting that was done in the 60s of one of the Doel Reed students that went out to visit in the 60s. But it was one of the students. She painted the parents' house at Casa Cooper, we call it now. But the parents' house was. I have a painting of that, and so it's the look is the same pretty much now. There's a screen door on that north door that wasn't in that painting. But, we'll see what happens there. But we may we have to fix that door a little bit, but we may take that screen door off if we get operable windows to get ventilation. Because there's a screen door put on there just to get more. It's interesting in that this painting, he put this door that he was real proud of in the north side there. A lot of people that would come and visit, he'd make sure that they saw that door, and that's what this person painted essentially was that door. But there's a few of the windows involved, but it's mainly looking at that door.
Yeah.
And on that, you can see there's hinges for a screen door, but there's no screen door. So I think he was so proud of that door that since then, and when we first did the property, there's no screen door on there, but there's a screen door on there now, and I think that got put on because for ventilation, so we have that door open. But anyway, I think for a historic look, we need to get that screen door off, and but we need to get some operable windows. Yeah, we're working.
You
on
got
it.
your list, yeah.
Yeah.
So you go over there fairly regularly and just check on things when there's not a lot of other things going on there.
Well, yeah, I drive by there frequently. I'm involved with another thing in Talpa that I go to a couple times a month anyway. So I drive by there at least twice a month. But since we still have ongoing little projects, and so a lot of these it's hard to get little projects done with pay people. So I go over there and do some of these little things when I can, but I can't. I don't have all the time in the world to do that. But so it's a never-ending thing about little things here and little things there.
Yep, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. Well, those are the things that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything that you wanted to say as sort of parting thoughts, or that we didn't talk about that you'd like to make sure to bring up?
Well, I think that's pretty much everything. I know. Think of anything else down the road, I'll pass it on.
You know where I'm at.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will turn